Greetings, I'm Professor Hobo and I'm coming at you with another exciting product review. Now there's many of you out there that say 1,000 watt hours of power is mere child's play and you want more power. Well, today we debut the largest solar generator in the history of HOBOTECH. It's the Pecron Q3000S with 3,024 watt hours of lithium ion power at your disposal. That's like having 5 100 amp hour lead acid batteries on wheels. And check this out, it even has its own built-in handle. But is it any good? Let's find out. HOBOTECH. So you might be asking, what comes in the box with the Pecron? Well, it's not really a box at all. It's a bag that even has its own little shoulder strap. I mean, they're really thinking ahead that you're gonna have to take this bag with you as you're rolling this thing down the street. Hey, battery capacity, which is of course the only reason you're watching this. 3,024 watt hour lithium ion battery. It's actually rated at 1,000 cycles to 70%. For those new to the channel, that means that you can fully charge and discharge this 1,000 times before you lose the top 30% of the battery capacity. It does not mean you have to throw this thing in the trash or replace the battery. It just means you lose the top 30%. Even then, you'd still have 2 kilowatt hours of power to deal with. So you're really not going to have any issues with capacity on this thing for a very long time. So it's 40 by 25 by 27 centimeters or 16 by 10 by 11 inches at just under 62 pounds. Of course, I weighed it myself to verify the weight, and that weight does not include the accessories and accessory bag. Of course, the upside to all this size and heft is the fact it does have a pull rod and wheels. So you can roll it around anywhere you need to, inside or outside. And this is designed to be laid down or left upright. So it's really your decision as to how you want to use this. And what I mean by you can use it in any position you like, the actual fans are down here by these legs. So even if you put this up against the wall, these legs are gonna prevent you from covering these 2 fans underneath. So you can lay it on any side, including upright, and use it any way you like. As for build quality, this is one of the very few metal power stations out there. And that means it's very durable. In fact, this is a very industrial looking design. This thing looks like it is gonna go on a very long road trip somewhere. And whoever really designed this did a very good job because there's only some plastic in the bottom, but most of this is metal. It's metal case. I believe this front area here is probably plastic. This little door, that's metal. It's actually got a little window in there. I'm not sure why you'd really need to see the display through the tinted glass there, but I found this interesting that I use a little Velcro strip to hold this handle up. So you can just tell by the look and feel of this thing, it's heavy duty. I mean, even the buttons, they're metal. They got a nice, solid, clicky feel to them. And that's something you don't necessarily get in other power stations. And this metal door, by the way, has little magnets on it. So it'll actually hold the door closed while you're driving around. You don't have to worry about it banging around or nothing. It's actually held together with magnets. Now, as for the display, this is very unique. It's an actual LED display, not LCD, not liquid crystal display, LED. It's actually the old school, like something you'd see on an old watch from the 80s. That's the kind of display on here. Again, a very industrial, very cool look. It does display the actual battery percentage, which is great for something of this size. You want to know exactly how many percent of the battery you have left. It does have a battery icon as well, and a combo input-output wattage meter. So this doesn't have a separate in or out wattage. It's a combined. So if you're putting in 300 and taking out 200, it'll say 100 on here. So just be aware of that whenever you look at this meter. Don't think it's reading incorrectly. They just kind of have it as a combo input-output meter. So basically telling you the amount coming in total or the amount coming out total, but not individual input and output like you'd find on some other power stations. I didn't find this to be any issue whatsoever. As for the inverter in this, it is a 2,000 watt pure sine inverter with a 4,000 watt peak, and they offer 3 15 amp outlets that are 3-prong. Now, as for the solar controller in this, they do not specify anywhere on their website, on Amazon, and I couldn't confirm anything from the company themselves. This does not have an MPPT controller in it. I'm pretty sure it's PWM, and I'll show you why in a bit. As for the various ways to charge it, we need to go into the secret Pecron baggie and pull some of these things out. Now, here is your AC wall charger. It actually looks like one of those little inverters that has a little fan in it, a little metal box. Again, it's metal, and it's got a decently long cord on it, and they are using an aviation style cable on here. This seems to be a more popular thing with higher end power stations nowadays, is to use these aviation cables because they do lock on. You can stick them in there and screw them on, and they are not coming off. So as for the 3 ways to charge, the first is of course by AC wall outlet. Now you can plug this into any 110, 120 volt AC power source, and that includes a gasoline, diesel, or propane generator if you want to charge that way. It is going to take up to 12 hours to charge this thing from dead. Remember, this is a 3,000 watt hour battery. This thing is massive, so you're going to expect it's going to take quite a while to charge it even from AC power. And interestingly, this is their 1224 volt charger. So they actually have a power converter in here, and this is what made me suspect this is not an MPPT inside, but a PWM. Because this accepts, on here it says on the back, 11 to 40 volts DC. So you can put 11 to 40 volts in through the cigarette lighter port, and then here's your aviation input cable. So you just hook that up, plug this into your vehicle, anywhere from 11 to 40 volts, and it will charge this. From a 12 volt vehicle, charging this from dead is going to take 30 hours. I know that's incredibly long, but think of it as like a trickle charge while you're driving. Now, if you're charging from a 24 volt vehicle, you can knock that down to 21 hours. Now, strangely, the fastest way to charge the Pecron Q3000S, and they give you the MC4 cable to the aviation adapter, it's going to be in as little as 10 hours because this does support up to 300 watts of solar. And we'll go over those details in a bit. They give you give you a couple extra fuses in here, which I thought was neat, and then they give you this book, which is so small I'm not even going to bother going over it. All right, as for outputs, we have the 12 volt cigarette lighter output is the only 12 volt output on this, and it's regulated at 12.0 volts, and it does provide up to 10 amps of power. As for USB, this only has 2 USB ports, but they are a pair of 18 watt quick charge ports. So this does not have the regular USB, and it doesn't have a USB-C. But if you're going to choose to have only 2 USB ports on your power station, I agree, make sure they're quick charge ports. Now, besides the 3 outputs for the inverter, that's really it for the outputs on this. It's a very minimalistic design. Now, the warranty on the Pecron is 12 months, but it also is a UL listed device, so you don't have to worry about safety, and it does have built-in short circuit, overload, and overheating protections. Now, my usual battery capacity test, I usually plug my meter into the 12 volt output, and I do a long-term discharge out of 12 volts. However, that was problematic with this. Not only is the battery on this thing incredibly large, but I also found out that the 10 amp port on this doesn't allow you to pull 10 amps indefinitely. So at the max rate that I could determine that I could pull out of here at 7 amps, it would have taken 40 hours to do the discharge test. Now, I didn't want to spend 2 entire days doing this discharge test, so I decided to go ahead and skip this test because I don't think most people buying this are going to buy it for the 12 volt output. Most are going to get it for the inverter. So instead, I decided to do the discharge test using the AC inverter on it, and that was able to go a lot quicker.
Final
results of the AC discharge test, 2,740 watt hours. And for the results of the AC inverter efficiency test, we're able to pull a whopping 2,740 watt hours out of 3,024, or an impressive 91%. That means the inverter on this is probably 95% efficient because, as most of you know, all these power stations reserve 5 to 10% of the bottom end of the battery to prevent damage. So that means if it's reserving only 5% and the inverter efficiency is 95%, you'd get somewhere around 90-91% total output. So that means you can expect a huge amount of usable power out of the inverter in this, which is of course what it's designed for. This is not really a DC output device. It's mainly designed to use the AC inverter. So if you're going to compare this to the brand new BLUETTI AC200P, this provides more than 1,000 watt hours of extra power than that top of the line power station. That's like getting an extra JACKERY 1000 thrown in for free. As for the DC output rate check, there's only one output on this that's DC, 12 volts DC, through the cigarette lighter, and it is rated at 10 amps. But I found something interesting in my preliminary testing, and I'm going to show you that right now. Now, the voltage is regulated at 12.0 exactly, so it is a regulated 12 volt output, which is good, but let's show you what's going on here. So let's go ahead and pull 10 amps from the 12 volt output, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Now, if you try to go over 10 amps at all, the voltage immediately drops, so it is definitely limiting you. Now, at 10 amps, it's still pulling 11.2 volts. That could be better, but I've seen a lot worse. Almost like clockwork, after 2 minutes, just after 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 10 seconds or so, we lose the 12 volt output completely. There's no warnings, no blinking, no beeps. Now, what I assume is happening here with the Pecron is that it can run the full 10 amps for 2 minutes, and then it cuts you off, and it keeps trying to restart. If I actually turn the amps down on this, you can see that it actually restarts by itself. You don't have to turn this off and back on again for it to actually start outputting 12 volts. I think what they have inside of here is a circuit that detects overheating. So when it detects the 12 volt regulation circuitry getting too hot, it just completely cuts the output on this. That's one way to handle regulation circuitry, but the problem with this is that I think they maybe went a little too overboard, because if I shut this off and let it cool down for a couple of minutes and then turn it back on, I'm going to save you all the time because I've done this test. It took me about an hour. At 8 amps, it'll run for about 5 minutes before overheating. And at 7 amps, it'll run indefinitely. So I actually ran this for 20 straight minutes at 7 amps, and it had no problem. So I'd actually say that this 12 volt output's closer to 7 amps than 10 amps, but it will allow you to pull 10 amps, or about 128 watts, for no problem for a couple of minutes. But just be aware, if you're planning on pulling really high loads off this 12 volt port, it's going to shut down on you if you exceed 7 amps. This is still plenty of power to run a 12 volt refrigerator or pretty much any other 12 volt appliance, because most of them aren't going to draw more than 7 or 8 amps anyway. And do remember, it's regulated at 12.0 volts. So no matter how much you charge or discharge the battery, it's always going to put out a constant 12.0 volts. So for this next test is the max charge rate test. One of the things I was not able to confirm by going to Pecron's website or their Amazon page is if this thing has a PWM or MPPT controller in it. I'm guessing since they don't mention it, it's probably a PWM. And also the fact that it's a very narrow range of voltage to actually run solar into this thing. I'm going to have to show you how they kind of have this set up so that if you're charging from a 12 or 24 volt vehicle, you actually have to use this, which is this little conversion box. It says right on here it takes 11 to 40 volts in and puts 30 volts out with 5 amps. So that actually allows you to charge from a car, but if you want to charge from solar, then they give you these MC4 cables that you hook directly into a solar panel. But then they tell you that the voltage range for your solar needs to be between 30 volts and 40 volts. It's a pretty narrow range. Now, I found that there's actually some play in there. So let's go ahead and see what happens when we apply certain voltages directly to the solar input on this. So over here is the variable voltage input. This is from a power supply. And then we can watch over here the amount of watts that come in. So you can watch up here, when you see that number change from 0, 26 volts. At 26 volts, we immediately get 128 watts. So let's go ahead and turn it up to 30 volts, which is what they say is the minimum for solar. But as soon as I try to do that, it locks my voltage at 27.5. And now I'm putting 290 watts in. Now this is actually the maximum. 300 watts is the maximum solar input on this, regardless of the voltage. Okay, I've unplugged the connection here. So you can see my variable voltage charger is putting out 51.3 volts. Nothing come in, of course. Now they're saying that 40 volts is the maximum input, but let's see what happens if I hook this up at 51 volts. Immediately drops it to 27 volts, and then we get our 290 watts of solar. This is still putting out 52 volts. So it looks like that will actually bring the voltage down to whatever the power station needs to charge. So it looks like it would be safe enough to run a couple of solar panels in series and actually exceed that 40 volts, because this will automatically adjust, as you can see. So what are the solar options for the Pecron here? Well, since that range they suggest is 30 volts to 40 volts, you should actually run two 12-volt solar panels in series, and that should keep you right around that range. Now, it looks like you can exceed 40 volts, and it looks like it'll actually charge as low as 26 volts. So there's some play room in there. You got some wiggle room with solar panels. You might even be able to run three 12-volt panels in series, although they don't recommend that. They're saying two solar panels in series, maximum input of 10 amps. So it's kind of a narrow range. You're going to need at least two solar panels to charge this thing. So what about this little conversion box that you use to plug into your cigarette lighter in your vehicle? What can you expect to get out of this? Because this is a really weird solution. Usually, you just get a cigarette lighter on one side and an input on the other, and then the power station takes care of it. This is what makes me definitely think this is a PWM controller, because they're using workarounds like this to allow you to charge it with 12 volts. So it does say the range on this is 11 to 40 volts. So that's good. It allows you to pretty much charge it from anything that you could run out of a vehicle. So I'll just save the time and give you the results of my testing. At 12 volts, it'll charge at 100 watts. That's pretty typical. At 24 volts, it'll charge at 140 watts, and then anything above that, I actually tried it all the way up to 51 volts, and it gave me 144 watts. So basically, it's going to be 100 watts for a 12-volt car, or 140 watts for a 24-volt vehicle. So how fast does it charge from the AC wall charger? Well, let's see. It's a little fan and it's not very loud at all. This light stays red until the unit fully charges. Once the unit fully charges, this will turn green. It'll also show on here 100%. So with the AC wall charger, we can charge at 222 watts. So at 220 watts, my handy dandy calculator says it's going to be 13 and a half hours to charge this completely from dead using the AC wall outlet and or generator power. Okay, USB output rate check. I have my little converter on here, so we're at the maximum of 12 volts for these quick charge ports. These are only 18 watt quick charge ports. They only support up to 12 volts. Let's see how many amps we can pull. We only should be able to pull about 1.5 amps before it shuts down. We're only able to pull 20 watts total out of these ports, so that's about normal for an 18 watt port. So as for a pure sine wave check, we have a pretty pure sine wave here with no load. Let's go ahead and add a little solar degenerator to that and see if it changes the sine wave. So it doesn't look like it changed. Now under a full load of the solar degenerator, it's still providing 107.4 volts, so it's still in the tolerance range. Okay, here's the moment we've all been waiting for. We're going to do the inverter capacity test. Now this has a 2,000 watt pure sine inverter, so we're going to have to run both a hairdryer and the solar degenerator at the same time to max it out. So let's start with the hairdryer on high. So that's pulling 1,412 watts. So 18. Well, that shut down pretty quickly. So let's try to repeat that test again. So I'm adding power by turning the knob back here. I'm going to try to get this to 2,000 watts and see how long it lasts. At 1,900 watts, I was hearing some beeping in the background. I think that was the Pecron, but I'm not sure. Let's try that again. Okay, I was able to push about 2,300 watts in for about 2 seconds. So it does have a surge ability. So if you're running an air conditioner or a residential refrigerator or something like that, and it kicks up, this shouldn't have any problem handling it. But do note that over 1,600 watts, it starts to beep, which is warning you that it's going to shut down. So at 110 volts, 15 amps takes us up to 1,600 watts. So it seems like once you exceed about 15 amps on this, it starts to beep and then it'll actually shut down. So 15 amps will still run any household appliance. Anything you can plug into a wall at a typical household can be ran off of this with no problem. Okay, I was curious, so I decided to go ahead and run this test again. This time using my 2 electric heaters and the solar degenerator. Now, I have the solar degenerator on a very low setting, but I'm able to hold without any problems 1,700 watts. That's a better result than I had with the hairdryer and the solar degenerator. So it seems like these more resistive loads, the inverter can handle a little bit more. I noticed around 1750 I started hearing the beep. We're at 1730, now we're hearing the beep, so it's going to shut down here in a few seconds. And what's kind of nice is that it'll actually just turn itself back on. You don't have to reset anything. It just waits a few seconds and then it restarts the inverter by itself. There's no resetting necessary manually. So if you're using this to power a refrigerator or something, that's great because you don't have to go back and push the button or whatever. It just resets automatically. And it seems to do that with the DC circuits as well. So I do kind of like that feature where it just automatically resets. But again, it seems like it handles just over 1,700 watts indefinitely. I've been running this for probably a good 5 minutes. And no problem at all. No beeping, no shutting down. It's running over 1,700 watts constantly without any problem. It's just once you get over 1750, that's about it. Now, another thing to note is when you get down to 10% battery, the little battery icon here blinks to let you know that, hey, you better start recharging this thing pretty soon. So here's something very fascinating about the Pecron, which I didn't expect whatsoever. Now, the Pecron has fans in the back that apparently would draw the heat out, but I have yet to get them to come on one time. I'm currently pulling 1,552 watts, basically 15 amps out of the AC inverter, but the fans aren't kicking on. This Pecron seems to be completely silent. At least I haven't been able to get the fans to kick on yet. Maybe I have to run it for a really, really long time, but I've been doing this for about 10 minutes. This fan still haven't kicked on yet. So the fans on the Pecron are right here. There's 2 of them. And they're not drawing any air in, they're not running at all. So right now this thing is totally silent, which I didn't expect at all. I expected this to be pretty noisy when you're pulling that kind of power out of an inverter. Well, how about that? As soon as I complained, they kicked on. So let's see how loud they are. They don't sound very loud. So about 58 decibels. It sounds like a computer like running full rendering on a video or something, so it's not unpleasant. But 58 decibels isn't necessarily silent either, but it did take quite a while for these to kick on. So if you're running any kind of low loads, I would expect you may never even hear the fans on this thing. So what do I like about the Pecron? Well, I really like this overall industrial design. This thing is a beast. By far the biggest battery capacity of any solar generator to date on this channel. It makes the Bluetti AC200 look almost inadequate. Of course, the Bluetti has way more features, costs significantly less than this, and it's probably a lot more state-of-the-art. However, many of you in the comments often tell me that 2,000 watt hours just isn't enough for you, and you want something truly massive. Well, here you go. Now, even though this thing's a monster and it's got 3,000 watt hours of power, it's still a very portable unit, especially when you consider it's got a handle and wheels built into it. So let me give you another example. You see how large this product is, and it's somewhat large and it weighs 62 pounds. But let's put this in a perspective. If you wanted the same amount of power in lead acid batteries, like batteries you'd buy at Walmart or somewhere else off the shelf, it's going to take 5 of those batteries to be the equivalent of what's in here. And 5 of those batteries are going to weigh around 340 pounds. Then, of course, you have to factor in adding a 2,000 watt inverter, a solar controller, the display, the case, the wheels, all the other stuff that you get with it, the 12 volt regulated output. That's a lot of stuff and a lot of power crammed into a nice little metal box that you can easily move around. So you can quickly see this is a pretty crazy deal for those of you who really need a ton of power in a small space. The fact that you can store and use this thing upright means it uses very small square footage inside of your vehicle or van or trailer or whatever. And unlike a big lead acid battery system, you can take this with you if you change vehicles. Heck, you can take it into a cabin with you, use it in a cabin off-grid, then move it into your RV, use it in your RV, move it into your work truck, and then use it in your work truck. So what else do I like? Well, I found this feature by accident. It's not something they even advertise, but I think it's very cool because it allows you to use the power that you need and only the power that you need. And that's the fact that you see it's off right now. This is the inverter button. It actually turns on just turning on the inverter button. The DC circuitry is actually off. So if you try to plug anything to the USB or the DC output, it's not going to work. So these circuits are not powered. You can put just the DC circuit on, just like this, and now just the USB and 12 volt outputs are powered and not the inverter. Pretty cool. And here's another big benefit to this over the Bluetti AC200P. The fact is that this DC circuitry uses very little power. This is only technically a 7 amp output for running a refrigerator. So if you're looking to run a 12 volt refrigerator for a very long period of time with very little loss, this is actually more efficient than any of the Bluetti line because it outputs so little power out of the DC port and it's still regulated. And you can turn the inverter off separately so you're just running the DC circuitry. You'd be able to run a refrigerator off of this much longer than you could an AC200. All right, what don't I like about the Pecron? Well, the main feature of this power station, the inverter, is actually a little bit on the weaker side. It shuts down prematurely, although I was able to get well into the 2300 watt range before it actually shut down. On the upside, the fans on this thing rarely kick in. You have to really be pulling a lot of power out of this to get those fans to kick on. Otherwise, it's completely silent. It's silent while it's charging. It's silent while you're pulling small loads out of the inverter. It's silent while you're pulling stuff out of the DC ports. It actually took quite a bit of juice pulling out of this before those fans kicked on in the back. And even when they did, it wasn't really that loud. And I'm really not super impressed by the DC output on this. Yeah, it's regulated at 12 volts. But I was only able to pull 7 amps out of it, not the rated 10 amps. It would have really been nice if I would have been able to pull 10 amps out of it indefinitely. It would have allowed me to actually do my DC discharge test on this, which I was unable to do, as it would have just taken too long. Now, obviously, because this thing's UL listed, they are taking safety very seriously. So I think they're cutting everything off much earlier than they should be. So as soon as the inverter starts getting a little bit warm, it's going to back it off. As soon as a DC output gets a little bit warm, they're going to back it off. It looks like they went a little too far on the safety, but if you're a person that is hardcore in the safety, you're probably not going to find anything this large that's UL listed with all the safety built in that actually works. Now, do note, I don't think most consumers are ever going to really push more than 1700 watts out of this inverter. I mean, that's 15 amps. So Pretty much any household appliance is going to run on this without any problems whatsoever. Just remember, once you exceed 1700 watts, it'll start beeping at you. It gives you a little bit of time. Now, the lack of power delivery ports or other 12-volt outputs on this is a bummer. With only a pair of 18-watt quick charge ports, don't expect to charge a lot of high-end USB devices. Then again, this really isn't a product designed to charge your tablet or your phone, which of course you can do, but there are a lot of smaller power stations that are more designed around those kind of things. This is more about running big appliances. Now, if you really need a power delivery port or additional quick charge ports, you can buy little 12-volt adapters. You can stick one right in here in the cigarette lighter socket, and it gives you power delivery and quick charge ports. So you can really expand this and do a lot of more DC outputs on this if you desire. So if you're looking for something like that, just go to hobotech.tv/Amazon, go down to the solar adapter section, and you can find the 12-volt adapter for that. The final bummer about the Pecron is the 300-watt solar limit. This is a 3,000 watt-hour battery, and at 300 watts, if you do the math, the fastest you can charge this is 10 hours. Now, at least if it had faster AC charging or dual AC and DC charging, it could compensate for some of those slower times. But the fact that the absolute fastest you can charge this under the best circumstances is 10 hours is going to make that no bueno for some. Now, others won't care so much because they're getting it for backup emergency power. So they're just going to plug it into the wall, leave it plugged in all the time, and probably run some appliances off of it, or just leave it stored, and then when you have a blackout, wheel it out, plug your refrigerator in, and you're good to go. Now, while this doesn't have a UPS feature built in, since it does offer pass-through charging at 225 watts, that means you can plug it into AC wall power, and as long as you don't draw more than 225 watts from the Pecron, the battery will stay at 100% charge at all times. That's enough power to run a modern Energy Star refrigerator 24/7 without ever discharging the battery. So yes, you can actually use this to run a refrigerator or freezer during a blackout. Okay, so the big question everyone has on their mind, how much is this monster? Well, for a limited time through HOBOTECH, using my discount code below in the description, along with a link to this product, the final price, as of right now, recording of this video is... Wait, hold up. Future professor here. I am now editing this video out in the quartzite desert, and I contacted Pecron, and they said, oh, wait, Hobo, we're going to give you an additional discount. So not only do you get an exclusive 10% off discount code from HOBOTECH, but they have a 5% coupon on top of that on Amazon. So it actually is knocking the price down to $18.69. That's, I don't know how long they're going to keep this price going. It's probably a very limited time, but that puts it in the same price range, the same ballpark as the Bluetti AC200P, which is only 2,000 watt hours. So if you want a huge battery and you don't need all the extra features of the AC200P, now the Pecron Q3000S looks like a significantly better deal at $18.69. Don't forget, you have to clip that coupon on Amazon to get that extra 5% off. Now, they don't sell this product directly off their website, so unfortunately, the only way to get it right now with that discount is through Amazon. And say you don't actually need all 3,000 watt hours out of this if you want to save some money. Pecron does have a Q3000S with a 2,000 watt hour battery for only $14.44 with Hobo discount. If you watch this video weeks, months, or years later, don't expect that price. If you want to be notified in the future of smoking deals like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel. You can also go to hobotech.tv/blog, put in your email address, and every time I post a video, you'll get an email. You don't have to worry about YouTube notifications anymore. So, what's the market for this product? Well, this is designed for those of you out there that require a massive amount of power in a small footprint. I immediately think of van lifers and RVers, those in tiny homes that have very low square footage. It requires very little floor space. In fact, far less floor space than any of the Bluetti products. So that leaves us with, what can the Pecron actually power? Well, anything. That is anything in your house that is powered by 110, 120 volts AC up to 1,700 watts or 15 amps. That's going to cover pretty much every appliance in your house, except for maybe water heaters, stove, possibly furnaces that run on 220. Note this only puts out 110, it does not have a 220 option. As for recommended solar panels for the Pecron, well, the funky requirement of it needing to be between 30 and 40 volts with a max of 10 amps limits you somewhat. That means you need to either run two 12-volt panels in series or a single 24-volt residential panel up to 300 watts. Now, my tests show that there is some leeway in there with the voltage, so you can go a little less or a little bit more, and it's not going to damage the Pecron. That means if you want a very easy way to charge this at its 300-watt maximum rate with only two solar panels, I'm going to recommend something like the 180-watt Bouge RV or 200-watt Bouge RV panels, which I have linked in the description below. Otherwise, you're going to have to find panels in the 150 to 200-watt range and run a pair of those if you really want to max this out at 300 watts. So if you're interested in the Pecron Q3000S or the smaller Q2000S, the link to both of those products is in the description below, along with the discount code you're going to need to get 15% off the price on Amazon. Thanks for watching. If you learned something today, don't forget to give me a thumbs up below, and if you're not a subscriber already, you know what to do. That's it for now. Till next time.
Odin commands you to like and subscribe, and clean my litter box.
Thanks for watching. If you learned something today, don't forget to give me a thumbs up below. And if you're not a subscriber already, of course.
RV Golf Guy, Jack Smith, Don Fulma, Drew Hahn.